It turns out that in the expanding universe, the force we use for the constant accelerated force of gravity turns out to be the atomic expansion rate of all expanding matter. They're the same. And that's the secret to it. And I'd encourage you to read McCutcheon's book if it's very interesting to you. Okay, so now this only counts for one wavelength and one frequency. Guess what? I just showed you a model of the chakras that had 7 of them, and each wavelength is different. So this doesn't account for all your chakras. And this is where I started in my first rev in my book, and I was like, wait a second, there's something missing here. Let's go on. Now, in the 7 chakras, we need to sum up the wavelengths and the frequencies of each one of those if they're activated. Okay, that first equation is true if you're living at your root chakra and nothing else is working. If your other chakras are active and I can measure the wavelength or frequency there, this needs to be applied because you've got to sum all those up. This is not the same as E equals mc squared. This is different depending on where you are on your evolutionary path. Now you with me? So there it is, wavelength, frequency, and gravity. Now it gets really interesting. Watch this. Ida Rolf had something to say about your relationship to gravity. If you take the limit of that equation, E equals W divided by G times the summation I equals 1 to 7 of wavelength and frequency squared, and you'd look at G, it's in the denominator. And if G approaches infinity, gets really big, that equation goes to 0. You see that?
Yeah. The denominator is growing.
The denominator gets huge. The number goes, let's go back. If G goes to infinity, a little number divided by a huge number goes to 0. That's what that equation means. What does that mean? Does that mean if gravity wins, I got no energy? That's what it means. I'm falling over into a pile of lump. I can't even stand up in the field.
Is the opposite hold true, that if you're in weightlessness,
well, let's talk.
Energy goes the other way?
Yeah, but that's not really reality for us. What can we do to get close to that? If you take a pole and balance it on your finger and can go like that and have barely any input, and it's balanced or parallel with this orthogonal field we call gravity, guess what? It hardly takes any input. And that's this equation. As gravity approaches 0 and you're balanced like that, that's where your energy reaches its max. So if you're not standing up straight on that line that I just showed you, you can't achieve this. So you're going to be at some subset of full equation 5a if you're not integrating the gravity field and your chakras aren't on. You go just beyond the Earth and you're heading to the sun and you reach geosynchronous orbit where our satellites are. Apparently, at that point, the satellite can either depart from the Earth or fall back to it. It's right in the middle, right? Well, if you go just a little bit farther, you're in free space where gravity is not affecting you. How could that be in the tetherball theory? Because the sun's still out there and it should be affecting it. But it's not. It's about the geometry and the expansion of these bodies that accounts for it. And you'll see that from McCutcheon's book.
Well, that's the centrifugal force.
Another neat thing he had you conceptually try is imagine the sun were immediately removed in this tetherball theory. What would the Earth do? According to gravity, the response would be immediate. There would be no delay. Yet, the speed of light from the sun to the Earth takes over 8 minutes to get here. So gravity is now faster than the speed of light. What we know about gravity is completely wrong. So anytime you multiply wavelength times frequency, you get the speed of light. I don't care where you are in the electromagnetic spectrum. Does that make sense? So now we're summing all these up, not just E equals mc squared. This is the true energy body for a human. And there could be quantum effects in here that we're not even accounting for. For instance, there are properties of light that have been talked about that are just now coming out, more than just wave and particulate properties. Okay. Let's see where we are. And we talked about the limits. So in this case, if you're standing up straight in the gravity field, the implication is, and Ida Rolf said this, you have the potential for the maximum human energy. And that's what my equation shows. And it's been my experience, too, that that's true.
What happens when you're not in contact with the Earth?
Like right now, I'm wearing shoes with rubber on the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm not in contact with the Earth. I've got an insulator in between there. And it's not good. I can feel the difference. If you're out barefoot on the ground, it's going to be a very different experience for you from your electrical body than it is wearing shoes. Does that make sense? Okay.
Well, so if you're barefoot outside, obviously then matters if you're standing on a man-made substance versus a natural substance.
It really does matter. So if you're truly connected with dirt, you're at the ground potential from an electrical standpoint. Make sense? What I did with Krista is she was a client of mine way back when we met. And we took a grid chart and a plumb bob and we put her through a 10 series. That's what Ida Rolf calls it. Now there's more advanced work beyond what I call the 10 series. So I don't know if you can see this well, but you can see the line here. Look where her head is relative to it. You see that? Very deviated off to one side. Look at where her...
This is the bad and the right is the good?
Yeah, this is the before and this is the after. So this is session 1, this is session 10. We had a video that did each session to show you from all 4 sides. Oh, it's the next slide, okay.
What time span?
This was 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
5 or 6 weeks. The date is right here, you can see
Couple
it.
sessions each week?
We did 2 sessions a week, yes.
And how long does a session last?
About an hour and a half.
Okay.
Okay?
So about 15 hours.
And you can see here from the back that it matches the front, that the head is deviated the same side. You see that? Okay? Look at where the pelvis is relative to the line. The whole left os coccyx off to the left side of that mid-sagittal line. Okay? This is normal for people. They just don't know unless they've had this done. And then again, on this side, you can see the ear's not even close to the line. Now, after 10 sessions, look at where her head is relative to the line. Look how much taller she is. Look at where the grid is.
And at this point, I was following a vegetarian diet and practicing to become a yoga instructor, so I thought I was doing pretty
Then from the back, look where the mid-sagittal, where the line comes through the pelvis here versus there. This is the way Ida Rolf used to do it. Real, basic plumb bob and a grid chart. So.
You know, I find this fascinating because there's so many things that Gerald is speaking about that corroborate what I'm up to in life with what I contribute in work. And it really has to do with the movement of energy. And what I feel is that we are receptors and we are conductors.
What do you do? What is your life?
What do you want done?
Tell us about yourself.
Yes.
Tell us who you are, what you do for a living.
Okay.
A little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. So how I came to this kind of medicine is as a reaction to conventional medicine and really not feeling particularly called to a more symptomatic approach.
Well, what kind of medicine is it that you practice?
What kind of medicine? Yeah, it's the kind of medicine that has to do with the movement of energy through the body to harmonize it and to allow flow. I think if you were to distill everything we do in our practice, which is called the Health Oasis, it's located in Royal Oak, Michigan, it has to do with flow. And any blockages of flow we find contribute to dysfunction, typically experienced as pain. So not everything produces pain, but pain is a good indicator and is usually what brings people in. So what we seek to do is to unblock those blockages to facilitate flow. When we talk about the conductivity of the human organism, when there's a blockage somewhere, you're going to create a dysfunction. Usually it can create an organ imbalance or a pain syndrome. And we use a variety of modalities to offset that. And acupuncture is one of the ones that I use typically, about 70% of the time. But much of my practice, I would say 50% of it is counseling. And counseling people to recognize imbalances in their diet or their lifestyle, what they're up to in life that contributes to the block. And so in this style, I was trained in China, and in China, you don't really move around the block, you move through it. And so sometimes that can be uncomfortable. Gerald mentioned about old style Rolfing and how it used to plow through tissue and be uncomfortable. In some ways, that also produced results, but it also scared a lot of people away from structural integration, or what was formerly referred to as Rolfing. We had a Rolf structural integration therapist with our practice for about 4 years, and I found it incredibly useful as a way to integrate people. And we don't have him anymore, but there's aspects in traditional Chinese medicine, which I'm a doctor of, as well as a naturopath, that also address the fascial blockages. And one of the techniques that Mark and Scott are familiar with, Kim, is called gua sha. It's G-U-A-S-H-A. And gua sha facilitates the movement of the metabolic waste that's trapped in tissue, particularly in the fascial level. And when you activate that, you mobilize it, it comes to the surface and you see it. It's quite dramatic, in fact. And when people see it, they think it's trauma, or if you go to a conventional doctor and you show them the results of the treatment, they'll say, yeah, that's contusions or trauma or broken blood vessels or something of that sort, which it isn't. And in fact, it'll disappear within 2 to 3 days as it discharges and your body releases it, and you release the waste. And typically I have people take a hot salt bath the same day of treatment with enough salt to continue the pull, because in fact the charge of the sha, the metabolic waste, attracts to a saltier environment as acid, because it's acid related, is attracted to base. So if we create a saltier medium outside of the body than inside, it'll actually continue to pull and not just try to settle back in. So we try to facilitate that means as a treatment to release that, and then facilitate more ease through the structure and the mobility of the structure, to create that length. Because typically as we get older and there's more trauma, everything gets short and tight and then pulls the structure out of place. And I saw that with structural integration, that's fundamentally how it worked. You're creating more length and taking off stressors from the structure. And so the combination of structural integration, manipulative type therapies, the bone setting that we use in traditional Chinese medicine versus conventional chiropractic care, and gua sha combined with acupuncture, we facilitate that ease and really help people kind of get over themselves, I guess, in terms of their physical condition. And so whatever it takes to create that ease, and we use other benchmarks to see how that occurs, but I'm fascinated with these tools that you neglected to bring, to actually see that. And it sounds like a really useful way to start with a baseline and see and facilitate the visual aspect, which could really support people in their process. We find that also that breath is fundamental to that shift. And most people, I would say, especially, if you look at that baby and you watch it breathe, it's fully abdominally breathing with no effort, right? Effortless. And in fact, when you're asleep, you also breathe that way, typically. If you don't, you typically wake up exhausted. But if you have somebody, place their hand just below your navel while you're sleeping, you're on autonomic mode, and so you're pretty much not in your physical being, your physical body, and you'll find that you facilitate that baseline breath effortlessly. But once you're awake, it seems to shift. So when it shifts here, it cuts you off from here in this lower area. So often people are asleep in this area, we find. And of course, there's so many digestive issues that occur and reproductive issues that occur as a result. But mostly how you notice it is people don't seem very balanced. If you watch a lot of seniors, just how they move in life, and just watching them walk down the street, you see that they're not very integrated in their body. And of course, it's largely from what Gerald was saying, but I think it's also a lifetime of not being able to facilitate a full diaphragmatic breath. So I think this is a real fundamental thing to learn. And often there's blocks on the midline that prevent access of being able to breathe into this area, into what the Japanese refer to as the hara. Hara means vital center. You've heard of harakiri? You know, you cut that place, there's no way to survive. Yeah? It's the center of your whole energetic being. So a breath needs to actually penetrate there in order to facilitate movement to your extremities. And this is why so many people have cold hands and feet, because they're not actually breathing into their hara. But also when you do, when you condition that ability, which is, you know, so basic and fundamental, you feel much more grounded and much more centered. And I think that you, as we've seen, the energy moves from the bottom up, which is interesting to me from a polarity perspective, because it seems to me that it's moving from the negative to the positive. And I've heard it said that, in fact, lightning doesn't move from the heavens to the earth, it actually moves the other way around, but your perception is it's this way. Again, from negative ground to positive heaven. And meanwhile, we're walking in this charged field between positive heaven and negative earth. You know, of course, we're, you know, and energy typically, in our way of thinking, the meridian system, these pathways of energy that move through the body, typically moves up the right side and down the left. If you want proof of that, ask any man which testicle hangs lower. It's always the left. It's always the left. And this is also why men typically lose their hair more than women. And it's because men have this more charged from heaven's force, downward, and women are more charged upward from the earth. And that's that yin and yang balance. Of course, we all have both, but a male has a preponderance of yang force, and women have a preponderance of yin force. So, and a healthy balance is exhibited in a relationship, a strong relationship between both your feminine and masculine side. So the practice really consists of finding out what's missing, where the imbalance lies, and what can we do about it on a practical level. If it's dietary adjustment, of course. You know, when you think about what are the basics, to cover the basics first, from where you breathe and how you breathe, to what you eat, and of course how you think, and how that establishes different ways of being and behavior and so on. And adjusting those things and creating that awareness, you tap into a different level of judgment. You know, typically the lowest level of judgment is just basic survival, right? Mechanical. If you watch that little baby, you'll notice that, you know, when they're infants, they'll just put anything in their mouth, right? And there's no relationship to judgment except survival. So then, out of that, based on the conditioned responses of the parents, likes and dislikes develop. And that's largely conditioned. And then from that, sentimental level of judgment develops. And that also has to do with desire. If your mother gave you cookies and milk before you went to bed every night, most likely as an adult you'll continue that practice, you know, because it gives you a certain degree of comfort.
I just have a comment on that.
Please.
So if you're saying that it's a conditioned thing, and you've got multiple children, then how come you can have two kids who love something that the parents love and two kids who detest the thing that the parents love if it's conditioned? Shouldn't they all be kind of on the same page when it comes to that?
No, because they're not coming from you, they're just coming through you. Those children, they are conditioned responses.
Conditioned responses, right? So
generally.
Conditioned responses, I mean, I understand that they're going to be different, but shouldn't the conditioned responses, if they're raised the same way by the same people, be more similar?
One would think. I mean, do you find...
I have two sisters, and I'm a lot different than both of my sisters. I mean, we have some characteristics that are similar and different. I have two kids who are very different people. I mean, so I would think that if you say it's conditioned, that there'd be more consistency among siblings than what I see from my own family and from my friends' families.
I think that likes and dislikes tend to be conditioned. And I'm sure that there's some things you come into this life with that come from the past, and who knows what the relationship is there, right? It's too personal to speak to, but in general, you can say that conditioned responses form likes and dislikes and sentimental level of judgment. When people come to my clinic, we engage the next level of judgment, which is intellectual, which has to do more with a needs-based conversation. Well, what does this organism need in order to function optimally? What doesn't it need? So if people understand that principle, I feel like I'm 50% there in terms of their healing process. Because then they just take it on, they get it, right? They take on the responsibility. It's not just like happening to them. They're actually taking it on personally.
And I have a question related to what you said before about the salt pulling out of your body. Is that measurable?
Absolutely.
How do you measure it?
Well, if you notice that the salinity of your body is just under 0.1%. It's about 0.87%. And you create a salt solution that's higher, like the ocean. Well, this is an ocean.
Well, I mean, but
like an
so
ocean.
that was my example. So you're saying if people swim in the ocean every day,
Mhm.
they'll be happier people, or that part of that will absorb into the ocean more so than people who don't live near the ocean, don't have the opportunity to swim.
Right, and then for those people, you can just do a simple salt bath and put in 4 pounds for an average bath, 4 pounds of sea salt, and that equals a 1% solution. And so the ocean itself is 4 times saltier than that. So if you took 16 pounds of sea salt and put it in a bathtub, that's how salty the ocean is.
But if you're saying that the salt draws that out, wouldn't it be a fair statement to say that people who have the opportunity to swim in the ocean every day should have far less of that bad in them than people who don't?
Possibly. I think that, they have more of an opportunity to discharge those acid wastes by being in the ocean every day. And it's also why traditionally the Finns have done saunas, to actually release those toxins and sweat them out, right?
But aren't those natural springs? They're not saltwater saunas.
Right, but they use heat and salt and usually herbs or something to help facilitate that release. Because, after all, your skin is your largest organ of elimination. So if you facilitate that release, it really makes it much more efficient. It takes the load off other organs of elimination. It helps to facilitate that release. So it's a useful thing, skin brushing and salt baths and sweats, sauna, and so on and so forth. Those are all very useful to help manage the toxic load that we kind of encounter environmentally and dietarily, and also mentally, because those produce toxins too.
And Stefan, as one of your patients who's been doing washer treatments and sitting in salt baths for 3 or 4 months that we've known each other, I can attest to the benefits of it. I see the actual stuff coming up underneath my skin. In fact, I had a nuke washer treatment a couple of days ago, and it's right here on my chest, and I can show it to you later. It's still there, but it's almost all gone. But it's purple and blue and red. It looks like terrible trauma, like a big bruise, but it's not. And then I sit in the salt baths, and it sucks it out. And it works. It really works.
Yeah, typically, something that looked as traumatic as that would last 2 to 3 weeks, right? Color changes, the whole healing process like that. And this has gone without a trace in 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, it doesn't feel traumatic, although it looks traumatic. So it's easy to fool someone. And in Western medicine, conventional doctors have never seen this, so they can't relate to it. So they would just say it's trauma-based, contusions or broken blood vessels of some sort.
They have these things in Japan that you can put on the bottom of your feet when you go to bed at night, and you wake up, they're like supposedly supposed to suck a lot of the toxins out of your body.
Yeah, that uses herbs, and yeah, we've used those before. And there's also an ionic foot bath that you can use with hot water, and so you circulate high amperage and low voltage through the lymphatic system, open the pores with hot water, and you discharge all this waste. And people, it's controversial because people say, oh, it's bullshit. But in fact, if you do it without any feet in the water, you'll get you'll get some discharge, but mostly from the demineralization or the mineral compounds in the water without the... yeah. That show some...
Everybody wants to see what it looks like after.
But what made you, so soaking in the bath caused that to happen?
No. That was a result of the gua sha treatment itself.
Oh, so you needed
And then the salt.
the bath sucked it out.
Yeah, after you, because you're literally pulling it from the muscular tissue. Well, consider this: the muscles themselves. If you looked at those muscle charts that Gerald had up, they're contractive. All the muscles are contractive in their natural state, right? When you're in neutral, right? When you're not stretching at all, the fibers are closed. But then when you stretch, the fibers open, yeah? So basically what we're doing is we're teasing the fibers open with a tool externally. And the natural direction or expression of that waste, metabolic waste, that acid waste, is upward and outward. It's yin charge. And so it's centrifugally charged. But the muscles themselves are centripetally charged. They want to hold it in. So as they hold it in, and as it accumulates, everything gets shorter and shorter and tighter, and literally then begins to pull your structure one way or the other in some distorted way. So by cleaning that out, we facilitate length. And each time you do it, there's less and less. I'm not producing it. I'm just facilitating a means for it to emerge.
So when you get a deep muscle massage, or actually almost any massage, the first thing they tell you is to drink tons and tons of purified water afterwards to help.
Right.
It's the same principle. Basically what you're saying is they're opening up the muscles, toxins are being released, and you've got to flush them out of your system.
It's the same principle
This is being drawn out with salt water instead.
Excuse me. It's the same principle on a lymphatic basis, but you can massage till the cows come home. You're never going to see what you saw in that image.
Is cupping the same?
Explain
Cupping
the
is
process.
different.
What tool do you use to do this?
I use a jade gua sha tool, which has its own vibrational energy, and for someone who's got an abundance of chi or prana or life force, what did you call it?
There's been a lot of names given.
Right.
I like the name Chi since
Yeah.
He's been using it so long.
Right.
They've used a lot of names.
Sure. And so, as that accumulates and you use that tool to open up those fibers, the natural expression is upward and outward. So it just comes out. If it's there. If it's not there, nothing comes out. If you did it on me, you wouldn't see any, just because I'm not a very good patient. So I just make sure I have it managed out so my body's at ease and I don't feel pain like most of the people I see.
Go ahead, something to that.
Please.
I saw similar issues with the connective tissue. And it seems the connective tissue, since it's not innervated, it doesn't have blood vessels going in it, it seems to trap these toxins in your body for some reason.
Yeah.
And when it does get released, it does come to the surface. And sometimes it shows up as acne or all the other things like you have in the picture there.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
The main thing is you're creating length. Without length, it's going to be a lot more work structural integration-wise to even manage it. So to me, it's a wonderful way to coexist in terms of treatment to really help facilitate the maximum result for a patient. I've been trying to educate the physical therapy community for a long time because so much of what PT does is fight this stuff. And then they go through 10 sessions, the insurance pays for it, and they come to my office and they got the same condition. Well, I'm signed up for transformation, not to palliate symptoms. Symptoms are only so interesting, but my primary interest is having people get their lives out of this work. So I know we have to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Krista, I'm Gerald's wife, and I run a vegan blog called Artistic Vegan, and it was actually started in the course of our marriage. We actually met doing a trade for structural work and vegetarian cooking at the time, so it encouraged me to create better meals, so he was getting his money's worth, and and as a result, we just it led to traveling and further creations, and eventually I created a blog and it produced a book, and I actually self-published the book, and he had 9 years of research under him, and it kind of sparked him to get going on writing his book, and it led us here. So it's pretty neat. Artistic Vegan, Meatless Mainstays for Modern Man. And as the course of him releasing his book, he talked about Starfire Gold, and within it, we had requests for the product, and so we just started carrying it, and we now offer that on artisticvegan.com as well.
And now she's an alumnus.
Yeah.
Could you just talk a little tiny bit more, because a lot of people were asking me questions about the browse, and I'm not qualified to answer them.
Yeah, so you usually start out taking 4 to 6 drops a day, and it's an alchemical solution. And it works as a superconductor, so it'll light up your energy body, and it can repair DNA. And one of the big things that it was used for is to lengthen your telomeres, and which can lead telomeres, and which are they're on the end cap, and they actually they shorten over time. And so this actually lengthens them, so the theory is it can lengthen your life.
What have you noticed in administering those for yourself or others?
I've noticed increased energy, certainly, increased mental clarity, and then we've had other people report, out-of-body experiences upon one time, and other people have reported, a dead tooth growing back, or even a dead foot growing back, like an amputated foot.
An amputated foot grew back.
It's starting to grow back. It's pretty amazing stuff. I mean, it works to repair your DNA, and Gerald's going to talk more about it as well.
So,
Yeah.
She ended up in the capacity to have to respond to clients after I wrote about it in the book. And so I did a lot of patent work on it and research before we ended up finding a product that we would offer to people. And so it took us a long time to finally do that research and go, okay, this is a good product for the right price. And now she's been under the tutelage of an alchemist for almost a year now, and she's gained a lot of knowledge and is starting to venture out on her own.
Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, part 2. This is actually the stuff on my book, so this will be easier for me. Some of the stuff in the first session was from the book, and Scott really picked up on that part. And me telling the story and mixing in evolution of consciousness and energy, that was a very different take on the ancient history that we're going to talk about today. So I think that's part of the reason I'm here, is I had a little different take on the whole story. So what we're going to talk about now is what the Sumerians told us about history. So in about 2002, after traveling back and forth to Turkey and discovering these older structures, I came across some literature that led me to Sumeria, and I'm going to kind of share with you how that occurred. So what do we know about Sumeria? This chair over here is right in the way. This one. Does that clear it up? Okay. So where is Sumeria? First of all, let's figure that out. And I'll show you a map. Sumeria was the southern part of Iraq where the Tigris and the Euphrates met and dumped into the Persian Gulf. Okay? So here's a typical cylinder seal that you would see from that area. And what was a cylinder seal? These were usually round cylinders with a reverse image carved very intricately in stone, and they would roll these out over wet clay and let them dry and then bake them, and they'd end up with these things that last for thousands of years. Okay? They wrote all their language and put all of their depictions on clay. And you ask yourself, well, that seems pretty primitive for some advanced beings. Let me ask you this. How long do you think a CD or a DVD or a VHS tape will last? Not even 25 years. Imagine that. So our culture will be erased in no time. They put their stuff on clay that lasts thousands of years. So, how did I start? Well, when I kind of got intrigued by history, traveling back and forth to Turkey, I thought, well, if I can find the oldest writings, that'd be the place to start. Because maybe we could find out something about what we know about ancient history in the writings. You can look at depictions and hieroglyphs, and if you can't understand it, it's not very helpful to you. So that's where I started. Like I mentioned, guns, germs, and steel, they mentioned this obsidian trade capital, Kalahayuk. And I was there in Turkey, and it really affected me that this was a real place. It was very old. Next, we find out that there's a place called Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey that's 12,000 years old and has megalithic stone structures in it. Who did that? 12,000 years ago. Okay, it doesn't jive with what's taught in our history books. So this drew me in. Next, I run across a guy named Michael Tellinger, this was years ago before he became famous, where he was talking about a calendar structure like the solstice or the equinox temples on a hill in South Africa that he says, based on the aging of the stone, was over 75,000 years old. Now, how could that be? Who was building calendars 75,000 years ago? So this is really intriguing to me. And of course, you've got all the megalithic structures and pyramids, and you've got the site in the Gaza Strip that looks like giants built it. They call it the Gaborim that built this. And it traces back to the Bible, the offspring of the king of Og. So this is really bizarre to me, right? So all these kind of things drew me in to start looking. This led to the Sumerians. And now you look at this and go, well, that's only 3,800 BC. So Göbekli Tepe is 12,000. Why focus on Mesopotamia? And I'll tell you why in just a second. We also know that in the Indus Valley, that was set up with the Sanskrit circa 2,900 BC, even though there's records go much further back. And then our standard tradition of accepting 3,100 BC for the pyramid structures in Egypt. So there's kind of the dates that we have to work with. Recently, some documents have started to be published that were the Sumerian account of history. Now, where did we get these? Along the Tigris and the Euphrates, over the history of archaeology, they've been gathering these tablets, found them in Nineveh, in Sippar, in Uruk, all these ancient cities along the Tigris and Euphrates, and these clay tablets were not able to be read for a very long time. It wasn't even to about 60 or 70 years ago that we could actually understand them. And there were, like I mentioned before, there were only a few people that could actually interpret this. Let's see what else. Here was one of the Sumerian accounts that came out, which really caught my attention because in that account, there was an individual in Persia named Major Henry Rollins in about the 1890s. And he was a hobbyist archaeologist. And he was out in Persia under the British rule and found a structure over 1,700 feet above the desert floor. And it turned out to be the cliffs of Behistun. In this inscription, Darius I, the ruler of Persia, was venerating a deity who was shown in a winged disc above him, and there were thousands of lines of cuneiform script on this cliff that Major Rawlinson climbed up, took a pencil, and got etchings off of it and took it back to the British Museum. Turned out there were 3 languages there, and it was the Mesopotamian Rosetta Stone that led us back into Mesopotamia and found all these temples. There was Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, I believe, on the stone. I'll have to go back and look at that. But one of them we still understood, and that's what helped us to understand how to read cuneiform. Okay? So we find it, turn of the century, another 50 years, there's only a few people that can read it, and it's just now the point where you and I can read the digitized version. And it's out there, it's on the internet now, and it's in different books.
Because of its translation.
Right, so there's actually a uniform script that you can download from cuneiform on your computer, and every single one of them has a hexadecimal code, just like any other font in a program. So you can get that today. Okay?
How do you know it's accurate in terms of translation?
This is a good question. I started that very question myself. And that took me back to the Babylonian expedition of 1906, when we first got our hands on these cuneiform tablets. A group was sent from the University of Pennsylvania to Babylon in Iraq to gather some of these tablets. They gathered about 119 of them. And they took photographs of them and brought them back and started decoding them. And a German student whose PhD work was doing exactly this. I got my hands on this real thick thing. And they went through and showed the process of decoding these tablets. I actually went through that because I didn't trust it myself either. I wanted to be able to read this. It turns out it's very easy. It's not that hard. And there's a whole dictionary you can get now to do it. So in these origins, I found some of their documents, and it stated some very crazy concepts about the origins of mankind. Some of it was so technical and so left brain with emphasis on references that you could go and verify, which I did. Some of them talked about motives for man's creation, our design constraints and longevity and intelligence, really important stuff. When we talked about in that first slide, Viktor Frankl and his man's search for meaning, we all need to know this stuff. So, there was a Sumerian king's list that kind of turned me on to start researching this heavily in 2009. I had read Sitchin's work from about 2004 all the way up to this point, and there was a lot. I mean, he's very detailed as an author, and there's a whole series of books. About the time I got to 2009, I needed to know that some of this had any validity at all. And it launched me on a trip to Washington, D.C. to go and get access to the Sumerian king's list directly myself. And I did that. I went to the Library of Congress and got it. This is amazing. The very first ruler turns out to be a person who occupied the very first city according to their accounts. So it all starts corroborating. I'm going to share that with you. Okay. So if you want to know about the Sumerians, read about what their kings did, because they had the chronologers and the scribes and the priests who could record the history. Let's go here. Oh, there it goes. You got to point it out. There it goes. Okay. Just a quick map to get you in the region. So you've got the Euphrates River coming here, Tigris coming down here. Turkey is up north here in the Zagros Mountains where these rivers originate. And they're coming all the way down through Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia meaning the land between two rivers, and spills out in the Persian Gulf. Now, this city right here, according to the Sumerian tale, was the very first one on this planet. And you're going to see that in my chart in just a moment. There were about 7 of them in this area that were arranged in a very interesting semicircles that are the same distance apart. And I'll show that in the map. Just to get oriented, here's Baghdad. And Babylon was just south of there. Let's see there. And here's Nippur. Here's Uruk. And here's Ur to get oriented, okay? Remember the first Gulf War, it stopped at Basra. Remember that? Interesting that military forces are being occupied in this area and that the creation account that we need to know about happens to coincide in the same location. It's not working again. Oh, I think I'm too far away. Oh, there we go. Okay. So some of the cities that we have pre-diluvial that were described in their documents are quite interesting what they functionally were used for. For instance, I talked about Eridu. This was called Earth Station 1. This was one of the beings on that genealogy table I sent around who said he was the first one that landed here that set up that city. And I'm going to give you kind of a quick summary version in just a moment. I just wanted to get you oriented on the real physical cities and places where they were. The story over here that they gave us goes with their concept, but these are real cities that you can go get and find today, okay? Interesting, I'm going to point out a couple. Shuruppak, very important. The king of that city was on the Sumerian king list, and guess what? His name was Noah. We know that from the Bible. When the flood came, Noah was the king of Shuruppak, city in Iraq. This is very interesting. Gold processing, Bad Tabira. Now all of a sudden we find out there are mines that are hundreds of thousands of years old in Africa, and that these people were mining them from their account. And I'm going to share that with you in just a second. Okay? Now, we talk about floods in the region. There wasn't just one flood. According to the Egyptian priests in Sais that had recorded the history in this region, there were 4 major ones and multiple minor floods that wiped out Mesopotamia. So we talk about Noah's flood. Well, there was more than one. So imagine layers of silt covering all these ziggurat temples and such along the Tigris-Euphrates and being buried for thousands of years. That's what happened. And nobody knew there were even tablets under there describing our creation account. This one's hard to see, but if you were to look at it and see how they were using it, Sapar, if you looked before, was listed as their spaceport. Well, if you got a spaceport, they're coming and going, and they were using Mount Ararat as an IP point as their highest point for reference and orienting along their approach axis. That's what they said. Very, very amazing.
Did you fly over that yourself and see?
No, I didn't. I was a helicopter pilot, and I was very familiar with using approach plates and VFR navigation and instrument navigation. So when I saw that equivalent radii around the city along with the central axis, I mean, that's how we set up navigation markers. That's exactly what we would do. Let's just talk a little bit. Before I go into this, I just want to give you the account so you're on the same page with me. What did they say in their documents? They said that 450,000 years ago, they were having problems on their planet. Oh, another planet? They said their planet was just outside of Pluto and was in an elliptical retrograde orbit around the sun. And they give an entire cosmogony of how that happened in a document called the Enuma Elish, which is their creation account, was read every spring in Babylon. Okay? So in that account, we know that the atmospheric problems they were having on their planet that they called Nibiru spawned the rulers to make a decision. They needed to protect their atmosphere. Interesting that we're having these chemtrails and spraying going on right here. Now, in this order of reality, well, they were having this problem too. Every time they came in aphelion with the sun after being out past Pluto, being a geothermally heated planet, the radiation was so intense for them that every time they got in close, they needed to protect themselves. And it was destroying their atmosphere. And they were fighting a losing battle, according to their accounts. During that account, Olalu was the king on Nibiru. This is their prehistory of their account when this is happening. This is 450,000 years ago, according to them. He was in charge, and he was trying to make the decision whether he'd fire a missile into the volcanoes to put in artificial methane, various gases up into the atmosphere to protect themselves, or to ionize their atmosphere with a radiation shield. And we know that a radiation shield that works really well is gold. We use it today in all of our space equipment. It doesn't decay, and it's a wonderful radiation shield. Turns out that according to their account, Olalu was a usurper. He wasn't even a valid ruler. He took the throne by force by throwing somebody else out the window. And you go, oh my gosh, you mean our possible progenitors had attributes like we did? Where do you think we got them? He was an unjust ruler, according to their account. He was in charge when this person right here was supposed to be the king. Notice there's 3 different heirs here from the top line. This one had no kids, so he was out. And this was the youngest son. This is the oldest. Well, this was the proper line until this usurper took the throne, and he messed up the whole inheritance account. At that point, the proper heir decided to serve him, and his name was Anu. He did it for some period of time until he couldn't take the unrighteous dealings of this person anymore, and he challenged him to a match. And how they settled things was through a wrestling match. Unbelievable. I think the UFC, I guess. He won. Anu won, and Olalu was about to be sentenced for his usurpation of the throne, according to their account. He left, stole a craft, and came to the earth in exile, according to him. He found gold here and contacted the Niburians to tell them, I have a solution to your atmospheric problem to try and get back in good graces with the hierarchy that was there. Anu's son, his firstborn son, Enki, from that genealogy table I sent around, was given the mission to go and intercept Olalu, verify that gold was here, and then set up a mining operation to acquire it and bring it back to Nibiru to ionize in their atmosphere, according to their account. So about 5,000 years later, about 445,000 years ago, Enki came to the earth, landed in the Persian Gulf, according to him, unmasked his spacesuit, his fish suit that they call it, and they depict in the cuneiform tablets, and set up the city of Eridu with the 50 workers that he brought with him. He called them Igigi, I-G-I-G-I. Okay? They were the very first ones. Okay? And the discussions of him interacting with Olalu and all that, they really happened. At that point, Enki started mining gold with his crew near Eridu in the Persian Gulf in order to get it back to Nibiru to ionize in their atmosphere, according to them. Anu wasn't pleased with the progress. And after some period of time, Enki was redirected to Africa to, instead of getting gold monoatomic as well from the ocean, they were to go get it alluvially from the alluvial sources in South Africa. Okay? So at this point, I'm going, wow, this is fantastic. How could this be? And I enter what I call corroborating mode when I talk on the radio about this. It took me many years to verify any of what they said. So where did I start? Being a scientist, I said, okay, if they're really in Africa mining gold, do we have any evidence of that? We do. The Anglo-American Mining Corporation found those old gold mines in South Africa. They own them today, and they're still working them. And they've carbon dated many of them. And that report has been published, and I put it in my book. Okay? So now we have Enki on the Earth with that city of Nibiru that I just showed you, the oldest city on this planet. But you say, well, it showed 3800 BC for Mesopotamia. How could that be? Well, it was buried multiple times, and it only resurged in 3800 BC. Okay, then they built more cities, and in addition to the pre-diluvial cities, they built several more. Oops, I got to point it over there. Okay. Now, I pass this around, so I'm going to skip these. The only thing I might point out, because it's very hard to see, it is. The thing to note is, right up in this vicinity, when you're looking at the table, there's two beings at the top of the chart. One of them's name is Enki, and the other one's name is Enlil. It's probably the two most important ones. Okay? Now, their inheritance rules were very specific. The offspring of the father and the half-sister was the rightful ruler. And that seems weird, but it has to do with the contribution of mitochondrial DNA in perpetuating this line, this lineage from the source. Okay? And it still went on all through Mesopotamia. They continued that practice even on Earth. So, Enki was Anu and Ninki's kid. He was his firstborn son. He was an extreme scientist. He was their chief scientist on their planet. Their second-born son came from Anu and his half-sister Ki, who birthed Enlil. And because of that, Enlil was the second-born son, but he was the rightful heir. And he became the Lord of the Command 5,000 years after Enki came to the earth. So Enki was down trying to do the bond heaven-earth, communicate with Nibiru, and do all the mining operations. Anu said, I'm going to send my Lord of Command. He's going to do all the infrastructure stuff, bond heaven-earth, communicating, getting the ore back, and Enki's going to focus in Africa on the mining. And that's what happened. While they were in South Africa, mining the gold, the Igigi miners in the Atrahasis account said they were doing it for many, many shars. A shar to them was 3,600 years. It's the same period that shows up in the Sumerian Kings list. They listed their rulership in terms of shars. The very first ruler of Eridu's name was Alulim, and he was the king. The very first king that Enki appointed on this planet. Guess how long he ruled? Anybody got a guess? Somebody's read my book. 28,800 years. That comes out to exactly 8 shars. Wow, how is that possible? How is that possible? It turns out one of the emissaries that came to the earth from Nibiru to have interactions with them cued them to the fact that they were aging faster on this planet than they were on Nibiru. And they had an aging problem, and they decided to do something about it. And you're going to see that in relationship to how Starfire Gold came up, okay? So I'm going to skip these genealogy tables. You can see them better by passing it around. So now we're in South Africa. We got more Igigi miners working the mines. Enki is there, Enlil is there, and some of their offspring are starting to show up now too. Okay? This has been going on for many, many years. According to the Sumerian Kings list, they worked for over 241,000 years before Noah's flood happened. So, right before that flood happened, the Igigi miners got really upset and they mutinied. And this is in the Atrahasis account in my book. Okay. They surrounded Enlil's house. You're going, wait, I thought Enlil was in Mesopotamia. Well, at some point, he came to Africa as well. And they were led by someone who was named Allah. Wow, really? And he's described as one of their fellow gods, the fire god, who told them to burn all their tools and go to his dad's house and get relief. So now all of a sudden you realize that whoever this being was the son of Enlil. And I show that in the chart. So let's talk about that a little bit. Ultimately, what that led to was, wait a second, if this one did this and this one did that function, we could track their presence across multiple cultures. And that's what I did here. They had a rank structure that was very significant. And they used the sexagesimal number system on base 60. That's why the top rank was 60. Right? It's very interesting. The top rank, as you can see, his name was Anu from the Niburian terminology. You go into Sumer, he was called Anshar. In Egypt, he was called Geb or Seb, Cronus, and then Saturn in Rome. Very interesting. Well, let's focus on Enki. Or, where's Enki? Enki. He was Ea, Samael, Adonai. He had many names, and you can see those on the genealogy table. Nudimmud, Ahura Mazda, and Poseidon as well. So I want to look, there are 12 people on this council. I didn't show them all here, but they each had their various ranks at a particular point in time. Okay, so Enki was ranked 40 in 3760 BCE. Enlil was ranked 50. He was the head of a council on Earth, the Lord of the Command. The only one higher in rank was Anu and Antu, and they were on Nibiru. So whatever happened on the Earth was really under Enlil's command. Okay, really important to know that. In that account, when those Ajiji miners in the African mines decided they'd had enough, they armed themselves, they surrounded Enlil's house, and they asked for relief. Enlil came out, and he said, let's kill one, and they'll go back to work. Anu and Enki were there and said, no, they've been overworked, they need some relief. And you start to see the attributes of these beings and the spirit of their how they conduct themselves. And it starts to cue you in that, hey, they weren't all friendly to humans. So, in that account, the council gets together and goes, what are we going to do about this mutiny? And they finally decide that they'd seen a bipedal hominid on the steppes of Africa, possibly Neanderthal or Homo erectus, whatever the being was. There were probably multiple ones. And Enki was signed up with his sister Ninhartsog. Where is she? Ninhartsog, who was Ninmah, who was known as Isis in Egypt. She was the medical officer in the city of Shuruppak. Remember we talked about Shuruppak and Noah? He and his sister were signed up to go into South Africa and take the bipedal hominids they found there, with the council's approval, genetically augmented to create a primitive worker. In vitro fertilization is not new. It was going on back then. And they described it in infinite detail in their document. Very disturbing.
So all this was motivated out of gold.
Pretty much.
Create slaves for
Yeah, so...
But why would they pick humans? We're the weakest physical species on Earth.
They created us.
They pick gorillas.
because they didn't want anyone... Listen, the problem they had before was these mutiny miners.
You said they picked a bipedal hominid.
Oh, they tried.
Gorillas.
Well, they tried animals. They did all kinds of chimera experiments. And apparently they couldn't follow the commands the way they wanted, and they ended up using Enki's DNA to share it with this bipedal hominid. And it looks like it was Neanderthal, according to the genetic studies I've been doing, okay?